It had to happen, Trojans fans. USC and Lincoln Riley were going to lose a game at some point. 55-10 at Oklahoma was pretty darn good, and he may actually post that kind of winning percentage at USC. But the first loss was not in embarrassing fashion in any such way. One of the more difficult places to play in all of college football, and USC went out to Rice-Eccles Stadium and took it, of course, down to the wire on a 2-point conversion by Cam Rising. 43-42, Trojans fall to 6-1 with one loss, of course, in Pac-12 play. This is our Trojans live show that we present each and every Monday night, 8 o'clock Eastern, 11 o'clock, where it counts on the West Coast. And, of course, Matt Zemek's the guy that makes it all happen. Please join Matt's work at Trojans Wire. Matt, how you doing tonight?
Well, that was some kind of weekend. And, of course, it wasn't just USC, Utah, but also Alabama, Tennessee, also TCU, Oklahoma State. And before we get into the details of USC, Utah, let's just make note. Whenever October 15 is on a Saturday, it pops. It's something special. Now, a lot of people will know October 15, 2005, probably the greatest Saturday of college football of all time. USC Notre Dame, 4th and 9, the Bush push, but then West Virginia 46, Louisville 44 in triple overtime, Penn State, Michigan on the final play, Wisconsin blocking a punt to beat Minnesota when Minnesota was good. That was in the Metrodome, the Glenn Mason years. Blocked punt in the final minute for a touchdown. That was the game that started the day rolling. You had Washington State and UCLA playing an 85-point shootout that went to overtime in Pullman. You had a guy named Matt Ryan coming off the bench for Boston College, beating Wake Forest. You had Virginia beating top 5 Florida State. You had all sorts of things happening on Saturday, October 15, 2005. And again, that's a day that a lot of people here listening to the voice of college football will remember. But October 15, 1988, what happened on that Saturday? That was Notre Dame 31, Miami 30, Catholics versus convicts, an epic game that lived up to the hype in its time. Notre Dame stopping a 2-point play. If only USC could have stopped a 2-point play this past weekend. But still, epic game. You had the fight, before the game. Jimmy Johnson, Lou Holtz, larger than life personalities. That was an October 15 game, 1988. And someone pointed out to me, 88, 05, 2022, 17 years apart for each of those Saturday, October 15 games. So, hey, if there is a Saturday, October 15th in 2038, 2039, it's going to be special. So, hey, USC lost, but wow, what a day of college football in Knoxville and Fort Worth and Salt Lake City. A day none of us are going to soon forget. And, we're big boys here at USC. We can complain about the refs, more on that in a little bit, but we can acknowledge that college football is something special. And it's just great to have USC playing a relevant game, playing a big game as part of the spectacle. This past Saturday was really something special.
USC is playing relevant games within the Pac-12 and nationally, and there's also a number of games, and we will highlight one a little bit later with USC taking the week off. UCLA traveling to Autzen Stadium to take on, of course, the Oregon Ducks in the first top 10 matchup in the conference since going back to the 2016 Pac-12 championship game between Colorado and Washington, a 9 versus 10 matchup. So we will be highlighting that one as well and bringing some guests in here, Zachary Neal of Ducks Wire and Tony Siracusa from Last Word on College Football to highlight UCLA and Oregon. Folks, leave those comments and questions in the chat. We will get to them. And of course, this one of the major steps toward on the road to the Pac-12 championship game as Utah comes back from what could have been 21-0 down. Maybe that's one of the first points of contention for USC fans, and rightfully so, on an interception in the end zone that USC was up 14-0 at the time. So we will pick it up in regards to the officials and, of course, comments and questions. Bring them on in. Matt, take it away from there.
Well, my journalism professors at Seattle University, and that's a Jesuit school for anyone who cares, they told me, you can't say when you're writing a game story under the inverted pyramid AP style that the refs decided the game. You know what? sometimes it's true. Sometimes it's true that refs decide the game. And you can say that that's whining, but just sometimes it's a point of fact that the refs really decided the game more than anybody else. Now, for the Utah fans listening here on the Voice of College Football, I wrote this over the weekend. I said it clearly. Cam Rising, Dalton Kincaid, man, they were monsters. They were super duper stars. And I would never walk up to their faces and tell them, oh, you didn't deserve this. Oh, you didn't earn it. They did. Like, Utah still had to make the plays, and Utah made them. So, like, Utah earned this, all right? And I can still say, on the other hand, the refs decided the game. Now, many people will say, oh, you can't hold those two positions at the same time. They're just incompatible. They're inherently contradictory. No, because luck is a part of this. Human elements a part of this. And all that Utah could control was, could it come back and win the game? Like, it wasn't a sure thing that Utah was going to win, even with those calls. So Utah was able to get over the finish line. USC's defense wasn't able to close the deal. Utah earned it. But I can still say that the refs decided the game. And let's just use like a historical example. 1985 World Series. People of a certain age will remember Don Denkinger making the call at first base in the bottom of the ninth. Like, the guy was out by 1,000,000 feet. It was an awful call, and it's one out in the bottom of the ninth, nobody on in Game 6. Cardinals 2 outs away. If that call is made correctly, Cardinals win the World Series. Almost certainly. All right? But Dane Orge of the Royals still had to get that winning hit in the bottom of the ninth. The Royals still had to manufacture that run once they got that gift call. And then Brett Saberhagen had to pitch a great Game 7 to win the series. So you're not going to go up to Brett Saberhagen or Dane Orge or anybody else on the 85 Royals, Buddy Biancalana, Steve Balboni. You're not going to tell them, oh, you didn't earn it. They played a Game 7, and they played a great Game 7, and they won it. So, like, they did earn it. But Don Denkinger's call was the biggest single thing in that series. So you can have the view that Cam Rising, Dalton Kincaid, and that spectacular Utah offense earned the win, and they deserve all the praise that they're getting. And you can also say at the same time, the refs decided it. And why did the refs decide it? Let's go into that piece now.
But before you run down the game, I just have to get this out because, Matt, you have the stage for the next however many minutes you want to take it as you take it through the play-by-play. But I got to hit on two notes as a huge baseball historian myself, and then also taking the position that you do on this USC Utah game, because I take the same position, and I have been criticized. I take the position that you just took concerning the 2019 Ohio State Clemson college football playoff game, that there were horrendous calls that went against Ohio State, yet Clemson made the plays to win the game. They earned the win. Travis Etienne, Trevor Lawrence and company earning that win. However, horrendous calls throughout that game against Ohio State. And boy, you start bringing up 1985 World Series. I could go on about Pat Sheridan and George Orta and bring up all these other players that, absolutely. So don't get me started on baseball history, Matt. We don't want to go there. We could be here all night.
Yeah, but that is a good, clean, representative example of how you can credit the winning team here, and you can say the officials decided the game over here. You can have those two things at the same time. Spiritual mystics will tell you that life involves having contradictory positions in tension. Now, there are some inherent contradictions that you can't hold at the same time, but there are lots of contrasting positions you can hold at the same time. So for Utah fans, you earned it. You deserve it. I never said otherwise, and I wrote directly at Trojans Wire, like Cam Rising and Dalton Kincaid, they deserve everything they got. They deserve to be happy. They deserve to be victorious. But yet you can also then come back and say to these USC kids who played so hard, this was taken away from them, all right? Now, USC's pass rush struggled in this game, and Utah's offensive line did a great job. That's a big reason why Utah won. Why is it then that the two times USC actually got to the quarterback on a big play, one to force an interception, and then in the fourth quarter on a 3rd and 10, and the refs basically flag them for playing flag football? That's horrible. Like, these were huge misses. They weren't slight misses. And Utah fans would say, oh, but all these holding calls. I mean, there was a missed holding call in the end zone that would have been a safety. No argument about that. But with holding calls, look, There's holding on almost every play, and that's not excuse making. That's a reality because it's in a tangled mess of bodies. And let's take apart another piece about holding calls. You don't review them. They're not reviewable. All right. Roughing the passer, like you have a full review replay architecture set up to break down this play, and everybody gets to look at, oh, was this roughing? Oh, was it with the helmet? Oh, was it late? So we had several minutes to break this down. That doesn't apply to holding penalties. All right. This is different. It's a higher leverage play. If you can say in football that holding happens on just about every play, roughing the passer does not happen on just about every play. And it's just two people, the quarterback and the guy who hit the quarterback. And you're just looking at these two bodies, and you have the replay system to break it all down. To miss that not once, twice. All right. And the second time was not just, the second time they admitted they were wrong because the original call was targeting. They rescind the targeting, but they still apply the penalty. And the vast majority of the time, over 90% for sure, don't have the exact numbers, but it's at least 90%. Like the amount of times that targeting is rescinded, but the 15-yard penalty is kept in place, very, very small percentage of the time. So if you're going to keep the penalty in place, and of course there are plays when you can do that. Naturally, the one kind of play where you'd keep the penalty and it's obvious would be a late hit out of bounds, because the hit's late. It's not targeting, but it's clearly late. So that's how you can keep the 15-yard penalty. This hit wasn't late. The guiding rule of thumb on late hits on quarterbacks, you get one step to the quarterback, not two. And this was not two. This was one step, one full step. And if you go boom, boom, 2 steps, and then hit him, that's a penalty. But that was not a penalty on USC by that 1 step versus 2 step principle. It was not by any means a late hit. So this is really the overlooked aspect of that second call where they rescinded targeting but kept the 15-yard penalty in the fourth quarter. No discussion about the lateness of the hit, because the only way that's a penalty is if it's late, and it wasn't. And that's the specific detail that's being overlooked. So with holding penalties, you could say, oh, he missed that hold, he missed that hold. He was looking at the left guard instead of the center. But that's kind of garden variety stuff. That's like a normal officiating miss. Doesn't necessarily make it acceptable, but it's just a lot more commonplace. And it is harder to look at a tangle of 10 bodies, 5 linemen and 5 defensive linemen, or 4 defensive linemen and a linebacker, 10 bodies in a closed space. And you can say, oh, he missed it. Like that's like a normal sight error. But this was quarterback, rusher, and you get 5 minutes to look at it on replay, and you rescind the targeting and you still keep the penalty. Like if you were to create a scenario in which the conspiracy theorists would run wild about, USC getting it from the Pac-12 because it's out the door to the Big Ten, that's what it would look like. Like that would be the scenario that it would look like. We have 5 minutes to look over all the details of the play. Oh, we were wrong about the targeting, but we're still going to stick that 15-yard penalty in there for a hit which did not merit any sort of flag. And the other point to make, Brock Heward absolutely excoriated the officials for this. John Wilner tweeted out late Monday afternoon, early Monday evening, that second call in the fourth quarter, the really high leverage call, was awful. All right. So the experts think this was awful. Not a slight miss, not a normal miss like a holding call. This was a bad miss beyond the normal regular bounds. Like this was an extremely bad missed call. This was like Jim Joyce and the Andres Galarraga perfect game. Like this was extremely bad. And because it happened in a high leverage situation, and because USC's pass rush was bad in this game, and then the few times they get to Cam Rising and do something significant, you take it away from them. I think USC fans are justified to say that the refs took this away from USC. I don't think it's just crybaby whining, because this play was higher leverage and they had time to look at it and they admitted they were wrong and they left the 15-yard penalty in place. Now, that's a level of detail in terms of procedure, in terms of process, that refs just simply trampled over that process and they decided to leave a penalty in place, which never should have been applied originally. You don't get that review process on a holding penalty. And I would say to Utah fans, I think that every penalty should be subject to review. Now, a lot of people are going to disagree with that. A lot of people are going to say, oh, we're going to have 6-hour games. And I get that. But if I was commissioner of college football, I would have a rule in place. You can challenge anything, and you can challenge, you can get to challenge 2 holding calls per game that you want. So Utah would have been able to challenge the hold on USC in the end zone, which would have been a safety. You get to challenge 2 holding penalties per game. But if you can't change the call in 1 minute, like every replay review should be on a 1-minute clock. And if you can't change it by then the play stands. And that's where the replay system breaks down. That's where faith in replay breaks down. That's kind of the undergirding problem here. Not just in terms of officials getting it wrong, but underlying it all, replay taking 7 million years to happen. If we could just have a regular 1-minute review system, then reviewing holding, pass interference would be tolerable. It would be stomachable. But of course, we know that doesn't happen. And we know that they reviewed this play with USC Utah for several minutes and still didn't end up with the right result. So it's from that larger context that I think the refs decided this game. They took a good play in a big situation away from USC, punishing the Trojans for honest effort and a clean hit on camerizing, and it happened twice in the game, affecting changes of possession. Like, I think it's pretty honest and reasonable to say that USC was hard done by the refs. But if you're a Utah fan and there were missed holding calls the other way, I get it. Like, I don't expect you to agree with me, okay? But I think the larger point, going back to the very beginning, is you can give Utah credit and you can say the refs really, really shafted USC in a unique way. You can have those two views at the same time. Life is complicated, everybody.
I only have one question concerning the sequence with the roughing the passer penalty involved in the same play as targeting, correct? Because I watched, I saw about 2/3 to 3/4 of the game, but watching other games at the same time, Clemson, Florida State, etc. And then the final quarter or so I was on here, so wasn't locked in on that. And my apologies, everyone. I haven't gone back because I should do due diligence on every game in the country, but did not catch up with this one in regards to what I missed. So what I'm asking is, the targeting is reviewable, but is the roughing the passer reviewable?
It is, but here's the thing. There is a possibility, and I don't know this for a fact, but there is a possibility. And Tony Altomore mentioned this on the Saturday USC postgame show. He mentioned that it was roughing with targeting. That could be interpreted as there was a roughing the passer penalty to begin with, and then there was targeting added onto it. And that could be true, but this gets to an interpretation-based reality in which, let's go back to the Music City Bowl between Tennessee and Purdue at the end of December. Remember on the goal line, Mark,
Yep.
There was a situation in which, the Tennessee was ruled to have been stopped at the goal line in the fourth, at the very end of the game. And Tennessee, the play was not able to be overturned. Like, he got into the end zone, but the play was not overturned because the referee on the sideline viewed that forward progress was stopped. Not that Purdue, made a tackle or that he never got to the goal line, but it was a view that forward progress was stopped. And so by saying that forward progress was stopped, by rule, that prevented a review from taking place. Whereas if they had made the view that, like, the knee was down before getting to the goal line, breaking the plane of the ball, then they could review it. So that gets into a procedural point.
Yep.
Where you just have to make the right basis for the ruling. And if you make the right basis for the ruling, then you allow for the review process to go forward. It's a lot like allowing a disputed fumble to run its course. Like, you don't blow the whistle, you allow the play to run its course.
Sure. And
that way you can allow the review mechanism to step in. So that is part of the larger reality in terms of the roughing with targeting and going into the nuances of that play. one thing that wasn't specified was precisely that, the targeting, what constituted the penalty if it wasn't targeting? Like, did he say late hit? Did he say, leading with the helmet? Things like that. That was never specified. And so that kind of leaves us in the dark on targeting and whether the roughing component was able to be rescinded as well as the targeting. But like that's kind of like a procedural matter. Because they never really explained what the roughing penalty was removed from targeting, we were all left in the dark on that. So that's kind of the procedural explanation there.
All right, everyone, we've got a packed week. Even though it's a bye week, it is a packed week. So full of discussion here on our Trojans channel here at the Voice of College Football. You're in the midst of it right now, our 24th edition of Trojans Live here at the Voice of College Football, of course. But in addition to tonight's show, Tony Altimore is going to be live with, and I'm not going to mess up his title. It is basically the Trojan, the Trojan. And Tony will need to explain that a little bit more. I should have been more detailed in regards to making sure that I know. Maybe Tim can let me know in the live chat because I don't want to mess up his title. But basically, I believe we're talking about the Trojan that rides the Trojan horse. Correct, Tim? Am I correct on that? And that's going to be live here at the Voice of College Football USC channel, also on the main channel. This is coming up on Thursday. TBD, a time to be determined, but it's going to be Thursday evening on the West Coast. And of course, we've got USC post game after every USC game. A little bit later, here in the next 20 or 30 minutes, we will have a UCLA Oregon preview as well, bringing on some representatives from those two media teams. The drum major, yes, the drum major will be joining us. Tony Altimore with that interview. And so this should just be fascinating to any college football fan, let alone a USC fan, to get the behind the scenes look at the drum major, how you apply and audition for that role and what goes into all of that and what a game day is like and beyond that. Yes, it should be a tremendous night of USC football talk with Tony and the drum major at USC. Tony has done a phenomenal job in securing these interviews. We hope that Matt will be able to make it back here. Don't know what happened there. May have had a technical difficulty. So we will dive into the game. And again, here in just about 10 or 15 minutes, UCLA and Oregon. We'll look at that one. We had some questions concerning. Let me go way back in the chat. We had a couple questions concerning now that Utah's lost a game, USC's lost a game, that if USC defeats UCLA and you've got 3 11-1 football teams, and let's say Oregon loses twice, do we really expect that? I guess once would be to UCLA, of course, and then losing another game. And it's a 3-way tie. Everyone understanding that divisions no longer exist in the Pac-12, that just the 2 highest ranked, I should clearly state that has nothing to do with the rankings, the 2 highest in the standings go to the Pac-12 championship game. So if we've got 3, forget their overall records, it is their conference record that matters. So if we have 3 8-1 teams looking at Utah, UCLA, and USC, and they've beaten each other in a round robin, meaning USC beat UCLA, UCLA beat Utah, and Utah beat USC. Then there's a series of tiebreakers that is pretty standard to the sport in regards to going to records against common opponents. It would have been record within the division, but there's no longer a division. Or maybe since the standings still are placed in divisions, maybe they have continued to use and will be using that as the next tiebreaker in terms of their record within the division. But then it goes to record against common opponents. And we would have to go deep into the Pac-12 manual and that manual being updated and upgraded this year because of a completely different championship structure. All right, folks. Tim says USC wins out, they will be in because they will be ranked higher in the poll if they don't meet head-to-head and finish with the same record. I got to think that, and again, I'm not going to discount that because each league, there's been devised for years and years and years in football in particular, a pretty standard tie-breaking system that most conferences, both in the NFL and in college football, use. But it is up to each conference to determine what their tie-breaking system is. I think, personally, that it is beyond ludicrous and pathetic for any conference to rely on the Associated Press or the College Football Playoff Selection Committee's rankings to determine what they do in their own conference. How pathetic is that? We have a conference. We are smart people. We run the conference. We make all the decisions that pertain simply to our conference. And then we're going to rely on some outside committee to determine who our champion is. That hopefully is not the case, but I know that it's been the case in other conferences, which again is pathetic. I wish I could use a stronger word than that. I wish I had a stronger word than pathetic, but that's beyond pathetic. I run a company, an organization, but I'm going to allow some outside source to determine the champion. All right. So Tim has posted record, head-to-head, national ranking. That is Pac-12. Okay, this is worthy of a video to be posted. I need to post a video on this and tell George Kliavkov and the rest of the Pac-12 how much respect I've lost for them. That is a pathetic, weak-minded, stupid, moronic way to determine your champion. Let's get Matt back in here. I got to get Matt's thought on this because I have not been able to. Matt, glad that you're back with us. We good?
My internet's really just being annoying, just like Pac-12 refs.
Yes, like Pac-12 refs. And you know what now? Like the Pac-12 commissioner and the ruling body, because this is what I have an issue with, Matt. So Tim is verifying here that because the question was asked, if USC beats UCLA and everybody else wins their games, and let's take Oregon, let's say, for example, out of the equation. Let's just say for all intents and purposes, they lose to UCLA, they lose another game. And we're looking at a round robin tiebreaker between Utah, UCLA, and USC, and they each beat one another. So, of course, nobody has the tiebreaker there. Tim is telling us that the third tiebreaker is national ranking, the playoff committee's ranking. I always thought it was, depending on the conference, each conference rules on itself and develops and determines its own rules, but there is a division record to take into account. And then there is common opponents before you get to the national ranking, which I, as a conference commissioner, wouldn't even touch somebody else's national ranking.
Yeah. So here's what I definitely do know. All right. After head-to-head, yes, the next tiebreaker is the highest ranking, or highest placed in the Pac-12 standings. It's the highest placed common opponent.
Okay.
So USC and Oregon do not play, but the other teams would have a common opponent. So if Utah gets to, wins out and has just one loss, then Utah with one loss, would have wins over both Oregon and USC, but not UCLA. If UCLA, loses to Oregon, so UCLA would not have the head-to-head against Oregon. And then USC, UCLA would basically become a tiebreaker because they would both have one conference loss, and then USC, UCLA, the winner goes ahead. But the way the first place you want to look at is the highest placed common opponent. So a USC, let's say hypothetically that USC, UCLA, and Utah all tie with one conference loss. Now, what that would mean is that Utah beats Oregon. All right. And so if Utah beating Oregon and then UCLA having one and only one loss and USC having one and only one loss, that means USC beats UCLA. So that means UCLA beats Oregon. So that means Oregon's out, and it would be a three-way with USC, UCLA, Utah. So they would all have head-to-head results. And so because Utah would have a win over, well, Utah and UCLA would have wins over Oregon in that hypothetical, and USC doesn't, that might not work out well for the Trojans because UCLA and Utah would both have wins over the Ducks that USC would not have. Now, it's because USC didn't play Oregon, but that would probably put USC on the outside looking in. Lots of things to slice and dice, but in terms of like having any kind of common tiebreaker or having a win over a quality opponent higher up in the Pac-12 standings that another team doesn't, that's definitely a subset of tiebreakers before you get into national ranking. I think national ranking is a piece of this, but common opponents or highly placed opponents that you beat in the Pac-12 schedule, that is the next one after head-to-head under the Pac-12 tiebreaker formula.
I will make two comments and we'll bring in our guests to talk UCLA and Oregon. Mine would be in regards to a tie-breaking system. Number one, I would not want to involve the College Football Playoff Selection Committee or any type of outside ranking. We're autonomous. We run a conference. Why are we looking to some kind of outside power base to determine our champion? We run our own conference. However, I will admit that if you're wanting to advance your champion into the playoff, then you're wanting to put the highest ranked team into the championship game that's going to have the best opportunity to get to the playoff. So it's a devil if you do, devil if you don't, on my scale, at least when it comes to that.
Yep.
All right, we've got UCLA and Oregon, and as I mentioned earlier, this is the first top 10 matchup in the Pac-12 since 2016's championship game between Colorado and Washington. We got Neil on the line from Ducks Wire, and we've got Tony Siragusa from Last Word on College Football. Gentlemen, how are we doing tonight?
Hey guys, how are you?
Yeah, great to see you guys. We definitely want to hear your thoughts on what has become a huge matchup at Autzen Stadium. Zachary, let's start with you in terms of the Ducks, because it was my thought coming out of the gate and just being obliterated by Georgia and having a first-year head coach in play. You know, how does he rally this team with little experience with these particular players, no equity in the program, first-year head coach? And I was fairly impressed, even though it was Eastern Washington the next week, that was not a 17 or 20-point win. They just went out and took care of business, and ever since they have been off and running. So are you equally impressed with the bounce back by the Ducks?
I'm definitely impressed. I think a lot of credit has to go to Lanning and what he's been able to do, rallying the troops after that week one, like you said, the debacle against Georgia. I don't think that's what any of us expected to see, but I think a lot of credit also needs to go to both the coaching staff that he's put around him. He got a lot of really skilled and talented coaches that know what they're doing. And then, as much as Duck fans don't want to admit it, a lot of credit needs to go to the talent on the roster and the guy that actually brought a lot of that talent in, which is Mario Cristobal, because they've got a lot of veteran talent who knows what they're doing, and Lanning seems to be the right guy to be able to put those pieces together and kind of get them headed in the right direction. And they're finding a little bit more success early on than I thought they would have. I don't know if that means that Lanning is a better coach than we thought he would be. I think we need to wait a couple of years before determining that he's some mastermind coach. But all things are looking really good in Eugene. I know that Oregon fans are very happy with what they've seen so far.
Tony Siragusa, Last Word on College Football. Tony, how many conversations have we had through the years about Chip Kelly and his failings at UCLA and possibly the game passing him by. And here he sits, and I don't want to oversell it because the first three non-conference games should have been gimmies, although South Alabama certainly put a scare into the Bruins. And Dorian Thompson-Robinson, maybe the knock, not necessarily on him, but the development of him has been that it hasn't been as expeditious as it should have been through the beginning of his career, but he's playing out of his mind as well. How impressed are you with the UCLA side of this?
Well, I think you have to be very impressed, but let's also be clear where the credit goes. Because I was pinged by Martin Jarman on Friday as we were having a conversation, and I won't go into too much detail because it was a private conversation, but that his opinion was it might not be a coincidence that after 5 years of covering UCLA, I moved to the other side of the country to Charlotte, North Carolina. And now look at the season the Bruins are having. Martin implied that it may not be a coincidence.
Tony, we're going to create a new statistic for Chip Kelly's coaching line. It's not going to be like divided into Oregon, the NFL, and UCLA. It's going to be with Tony and without Tony.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I think one of the things you look at with UCLA, obviously, is the maturity. It is a very veteran team. Not just through players that they've brought up themselves, but players that they got through the transfer portal. There's a large number of grad students that they've got on this roster making an impact on the team. But I think one of the things you look at first and foremost is the offense, is Dorian Thompson-Robinson. There's a maturity to him, a mental and emotional maturity that is showing up on the field. He was always very athletic. He always had the skill set. But he didn't always understand the moment. He didn't always grasp the what needed to be done in any given time and space on the field. And you see him grasping that fully now. There's a maturity to his game where he's not trying to do things he shouldn't do. He's not forcing balls into places that he really has no business trying to get a pass in. That he is utilizing all parts of his offense to the best of his ability, even when he's checking off plays. So I think really that's the start of it. And look, we've gone from a quarterback who, for the better part of 3 years, the fan base always wanted to know who was next, who was behind him. And now you have a guy who I don't think there's any question is so far this season after 6 weeks has put himself at least in the conversation to get some Heisman thought.
Tony, good to talk to you again.
You too, Matt.
The surprise of the season is not just that Chip Kelly's regained his fastball from Zachary Neal's Oregon Ducks a decade ago, and that there really is a large similarity to Chip Kelly era Oregon in this UCLA team. But also, UCLA didn't play well against South Alabama. Like that game was right on the razor's edge. So it's not as though DTR just had this immediate ascendancy at the start of the season. Something happened midway that got everything to click. What was the moment when it all seemed to come together and that new level of awareness that you accurately pointed to really seemed to emerge?
Yeah, you're right. UCLA was a bad play call by the South Alabama coaching staff away from actually losing that game, which, would have just fed into the narrative of Chip Kelly and his failed tenure at UCLA. I think really what there was, there's a bit of a slowing down of the game. DTR didn't even play all of the game against Bowling Green or against Alabama because why would he? They were blowouts and you didn't need it. He gets, plays the whole way through against South Alabama, and it was a kind of mediocre game. But then you get all the conference games, after that. And there was something that really elevated his game against Colorado. He obviously stepped up in tremendous fashion against Washington, which at this point, I think many of us can agree was a hugely overrated Washington team going into the season versus where they are now. And then had a great game against Utah, which was, I think, look, DTR is, and I don't say this as a negative, he's a cocky young kid. He really is. There's a difference between self-confidence and cocky. He's never lacked self-confidence. There's a part of him that is enjoying having a bit of a chip on his shoulder of all these doubters, all of these years. You know, I know, Matt, you and I have talked about it, and Mark and I have certainly talked about it. His mother, Melva, is big on the social media front and throwing out her commentary to people like me with what her son is capable of and what he can do. And he's kind of ingrained a lot of that into his on-field persona right now. So when he's playing Michael Penix against Washington, or he's playing Cam Rising against Utah, he's taking it as a personal competition to elevate his team. And you know, I really think that that's a big part of it right now. And so clearly Saturday against Bo Nix, whom I have never been that high on at Auburn because of his inconsistency, but Nix is having a terrific season up in Eugene. And so I think this is like the next elevation for DTR to see if he can step up to that level.
So, Zach, you know, I've talked to Tony about UCLA getting through that tricky spot against South Alabama, and that just seemed to unlock and liberate UCLA. So for Oregon, that moment was in the Palouse, down 12 with 4 minutes left. Seems to me that it's more than just beating Washington State that really got that Ferrari roaring up there in Eugene. It's the way they did it. And it was Bo Nix being able to lead that late comeback. That really seemed to have an especially big galvanizing effect on the locker room, on the offense, in terms of how everybody was on the same page, believing in themselves. I mean, it really seemed that Oregon, I mean, obviously the first 56 minutes of that game were a mess, but winning that game the way they did, that really seemed to carry some extra value for this team in terms of bringing it together the way we've seen the past few weeks.
Definitely. And that was a game that, I mean, in past regimes, we've seen Oregon lose that game 10 times out of 10. I mean, there was no way that we've seen under previous coaching staffs them come back, then be down that late in the game and actually come back and decide that, hey, we're not going to lose to this inferior team. We're going to step up and win on the road in a tough environment. And all credit to them. But yeah, it really invigorated the team. They came back, they put up 40 points in every game since Georgia. And the offense, like you said, is really rolling right now under Bo Nix and Kenny Dillingham as offensive coordinator. I think that marriage between them that we saw at Auburn, I really think that's a huge part of why he's finding so much success up here in Eugene. But they've really got all of the pieces going, and I don't know what can stop them right now. We kind of have gone into certain games we're thinking that, you know, their secondary might be a problem against Arizona, or their run defense, you know, might not stand up to everything that they see. And so far they've kind of stood up to every test that we've seen so far. I know there's going to be a big test this week against UCLA. I mean, UCLA does everything well. They've got great pass defense, or great passing, great rushing. And so they're going to put Oregon's defense to the test. But I don't know. I'm really confident with what I've seen from this group so far that they're going to continue to kind of key in on what they need to get better at and keep going in the right direction and find answers that they need to.
It's amazing to me how much these teams, in a sense, mirror each other. They both have quarterbacks who have taken a beating, you know, both mentally and emotionally and on the field, who have really stepped up this season. You look at UCLA's defense, which has been the bane of its existence for the 4 years prior to this, prior to getting rid of Jerry Azaneo and bringing in Bill McGovern. UCLA's rushing defense is 16th in the country right now. But hey, wait a second. Oregon's is 13th. So while we're talking about the offenses and you talk about the run game and, you know, UCLA, Zach Charbonnet, you know, I was stunned when he came back for another season. I didn't think he needed to. And boy, you know, was I wrong, because you look at the season he's having and he's adding several more zeros to his paycheck, you know, for next season in the NFL. So both teams have a quarterback who's really found a next level, a next gear in their game. You've got defenses that are amazingly similar, at least in terms of production. and stopping the other team. You've got an Oregon offense that's averaging 42 points a game and a UCLA offense that's averaging 41.5 points a game. I mean, this is, you can't ask for a much more even setup.
Tony and Zach, let me ask the same question to each of you. It doesn't require a long answer.
Sure.
If this game is a track meet, are you feeling good? Like Oregon is the roaring Ferrari, UCLA roaring Lamborghini. Like, how do you welcome a wide open game similar to what we saw with Utah and USC, or does one of you think, oh, actually we need to control the ball, grind down the other team, and slow the tempo of this? We're not talking Dana Altman and Mick Cronin, but how would you view the prospect of track meet versus a slowed down game, and which team that favored? Let's start with Zach.
I think I would accept that. I think that Oregon can thrive in that. That's not me saying that I think that if it's a track meet that Oregon would win, but those are the types of games that we've seen Oregon play so far. We are yet to see Oregon win a 21-10 game or a 17-10 game. So I know that they're succeeding when they're putting points on the board. And I know that their defense is also liable to give up points at times. So if this is a game where the over hits 75 or something like that, that doesn't dissuade me from saying that the Ducks can still win this. So I think that Oregon can still succeed in a game like that.
I think if it is a slow down, low scoring game, UCLA loses. Now, that's not to say I think they're going to win if it's a track meet, but I don't think they win if it's a low scoring game. I think they need Charbonnet to bust off a 35-yarder somewhere in the process. I think, you need DTR to be looking at Jake Bobo for, 20, 25-yard, pass catches in there. And I think UCLA needs to be putting up 40 plus for them to have a shot to win it. If it's a low scoring, rain up there, slowing down the pace of the game, I don't like UCLA's odds.
One of the things we had in the USC-Utah game in terms of the tactics was that Utah offensive coordinator Andy Ludwig, he relied on the pass, and that he really outflanked Alex Grinch by sticking with the pass, because USC continued to expect the run and continued to get burned, expecting Tavion Thomas between the tackles, having Cam Rising throw to Dalton Kincaid. Alex Grinch never made that adjustment. So with that as a basis, if let's ask Zach about this. So if you're Oregon's defense, are you content to allow 4-yard handoffs to Charbonnet so that UCLA is going to incrementally, matriculate the ball down the field, but at the expense of splash plays? The Bruins don't get splash plays, but they keep Oregon's defense on the field. They control the ball. They keep it away from Oregon's offense. Are you should Oregon tactically do what USC did not do, which is give up the 4 or 5-yard handoff so that you prevent the big splash play over the top, you prevent the home run? Do you think that is a proper point of focus for Oregon, or do you think you have to stack the box against Charbonnet, and so that you turn DTR into just a thrower, not a runner, and you force him to win this game down the field with his arm?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that the Ducks are going to need to do is try and stop the run, but I don't think that necessarily means they need to stack the box. Like we were saying earlier, both teams have really incredible rushing defenses, and I think these defensive lines can do a great job in the front seven of stacking not stacking the box, but plugging those rushing lanes and getting some pressure up there. So I worry the most about the secondary with Oregon. I know that's probably the weakest spot of their defense. They've got a couple nice pieces there, but the pass rush has struggled to get pressure all year now. So I think their main focus needs to be stopping the run. I worry about that allowing DTR to kind of use his legs more and kind of open up the passing game. But we've seen Oregon play a couple of mobile quarterbacks so far in Cameron Ward and Jaden DeLora, and they've done pretty well against both of those guys at holding them in the pocket and not letting them get loose. So, I think that should be the main key for them.
All right, Tony. So you saw Caleb Williams. He busted loose for some big runs at times against Utah. DTR against Utah did not have to run. Charbonnet was able to carry the ball. DTR did it all with his arm. So what's your sense of how UCLA's offense and Chip Kelly going against Oregon's defense? Do you need to unleash DTR as a runner in this game to get at Zach's Oregon defense, or do you think that no, he can just do it with his arm, and you give the rock to Charbonnet and you kind of keep that division of labor as you had against Utah, which worked pretty well?
It did work well, but I think, giving credit where credit is due to Oregon's rush defense, I think you need a greater diversity against Oregon in your offense than you had against Utah. I think you need a greater mix. You look at DTR and he's completing 75% of his passes, but there's no real but after that, other than it's for 250 a game, right? So it's not like he's throwing for 350, 400 yards a game. He's getting about 252 a game. If you get him to that level, he doesn't have to have some breakout 400-yard game. If you get him to that level, get your 100 yards that you're getting from Charbonnet, but keep that offense diverse. Don't overly rely on DTR going downfield. Let him run. Let him do the RPO offense. He seems to be doing it better and making better decisions in it than he has historically. Keep that balance in the offense, and I think you'll be competitive all the way to the end.
Interesting number there. DTR is number one in the nation in completion percentage, a statistic that I don't completely buy into because of the completion percentage factoring in, but UCLA's 12th in the nation in yards per attempt. I would love to see the yards per completion statistic, which speaks more to what Tony's point, because obviously when you're completing passes, even if they're dump offs, you're going to be fairly high on the yards per attempt list. But DTR has really stepped up his game this year for sure.
Yeah, he's a different quarterback than what we've seen in the past. And like I said, it's a lot of it. Look, everybody on the offensive line, he's had talented offensive linemen in front of him before. The line he has in front of him, it seems like these guys have been playing college football forever. He's got guys like John Gaines, who's been in front of him forever, and Duke Clemens, and Raekwon O'Neal, who was a grad transfer, and he's in his 5th year. So you got these guys who've been around a long time, and it makes a difference. And I think having Charbonnet come back behind him has made a huge difference in his confidence level in the offense. It's not that Keegan Jones isn't good or that they didn't have other guys, but to have a guy with Charbonnet's skill who doesn't turn the ball over, because that was one of the raps against DTR, and it's gotten better over the years. But you're going to turn around and hand the ball off to Charbonnet, and regardless of what yards he gets, he's not going to turn the ball over. He's not going to put it on the ground. Like Mark said, you're moving the chains forward, however much at a time. You're moving those yard markers forward, and I think it has a big impact on the confidence you're seeing in DTR.
Who's an under-the-radar player that you're really looking for to make a difference for each of your teams? Start with Zach and then go to Tony on that one.
I think the biggest one, if I'm speaking offensively, is tight end Terrence Ferguson. He had a really good start to the season. He had 4 touchdowns, I think, in the first 3 games, if I'm not wrong there. But he's a really big red zone threat for the offense, and I just think that there's so many things that this team can do once they get inside the 20s, and they've kind of struggled a little bit in that sense. I know some of that's play calling, some of that's penalties that we've seen in the past few weeks, but Bo Nix and Terrence Ferguson have really kind of developed a relationship, I feel, and that's someone that I could see going off if Oregon is to have a good game.
I think for UCLA fans, you need to sit down with what I'm about to say. The surprise under the radar impact is going to come on defense. I know that's, heresy in UCLA land for the last 4 years. But I think you're going to see a couple of guys. John Vaughns, the linebacker, who misses spring camp every year because he's a high-end outfielder on the baseball team. He's had a really good season so far. And I think you look at a guy like Mo Osling III, who's having a really good season at safety. I think that those 2 guys, if you can put pressure on Nix from the outside, from a John Vaughns or from either one of the Murphy twins, and get any pressure to flush him out, I think you're going to have a higher chance of success. Don't let him, he's a mobile quarterback, but it's a matter of how he uses that mobility. If he's using it because he's being flushed out of the pocket versus, it's a design play, it's a design rollout, it's a huge difference. So I actually think the difference makers on the UCLA team for Saturday will come from the defensive side of the ball.
All right, we've got one of the more important games for UCLA going back to when. When would you fill in the blank for that one, Tony, in regards to when was the last time UCLA played this important of a football game?
You know what? It's been a while. Look, they haven't won, and of course they don't play Oregon every year, and so they certainly don't play at Autzen every other year. Factor that in, they haven't won at Autzen since 2004. It's been a long time. And I think part of what makes this game bigger, look, there have been other times when UCLA started 7-0. I think it was 2001, 2000, somewhere around there. Drew Olson, a team. What makes this different is the lack of the divisional play for the conference championship game, right? Because you don't have to worry about, well, Utah did this and SC is doing this, and where do we fit in with this? You finish top 2, period, and you're playing for the conference championship, and so it really, it really changes your outlook. You win this game, if you're UCLA, you're 7-0, you're in the driver's seat, you're in the number 1 spot with a little tiny bit of margin for error if it's there, as opposed to we lost to a divisional rival and now we're done. You've got the SC game coming up and you've got some other big games coming up. But I think that this is as big as UCLA has played in terms of importance of the game in a lot of years. Chip Kelly, of course, today meeting with the media was just talking about they just treat it like, it's business as usual. You know how Chip is. We joke about this. They're just trying to have a great Monday, and they don't worry about all this other stuff. And tomorrow they'll just be trying to have a great Tuesday. But it's a bigger deal, and the players know it. And I think the difference this year is it's a veteran team, and so they know how to handle it better than past teams.
Zachary, what's a successful year for Dan Lanning?
Oh, I think the answer to that question has changed a little bit as the season has gotten on, because we've seen I think the ceiling for this team is a little bit higher than I initially expected it. Coming into the year, I said that 9-3 would be the baseline for a good season. I thought 10-2 would probably be the ceiling. After that first game of the year, I thought that maybe 8-4 might be what we expected. But after what we've seen in the past few weeks, I believe that this team can make it to a Pac-12 championship game. And, depending on who they play, I think they've got a really good shot at winning that game and making it into your Six Bowl. I've seen a lot of fans recently on Oregon Twitter Spaces and everything talking about, there's still a spot in the college football playoff. There's a path there. I would pump the brakes, because that a lot has to break the right way for that to happen. Yes, it's possible. Yes, I'm not ruling it out, but I'm going to take one of the Chip Kelly mantras here that we know so well in Eugene, that let's just focus on this game right now. Let's focus on having it tomorrow. Let's win the day. But we got to focus on UCLA right now, and what happens after that, we'll see. But I still hold to my prediction that 10-2, maybe I'm willing to say 11-1 right now is what I expect out of this team.
I got to say, I was not one of the people who was throwing Oregon away after the loss to Georgia, because while Oregon didn't play well, I gave a lot of credit. Georgia's just that good. And the defense, even with the players that they lost to the NFL, and it was a huge number that they lost to the NFL, the defense was still that good. And so, tough game for Oregon but you get it out of the way early, and there isn't that much damage done in terms of the conference race. I had picked UCLA to go 9-3 when the season started. I thought that they were going to stumble somewhere in the mix of Washington, Utah, Oregon in consecutive games, even with the bye week settled in there. The win over Washington was fine, but I looked at Washington and their big wins are over a bad Michigan State team and a bad Stanford team, you know. So it's kind of like, man, not that big a deal. The Utah game impressed me. That really hit a chord with looking at what UCLA was capable of, and you know, now 9-3 feels like I undersold them. So you know, we'll see what happens Saturday, of course.
Matt, do you have anything else for these two?
Final question would simply be, as not just forecasting this game, UCLA Oregon, but also the rest of the Pac-12 season to come heading into November. Is any Pac-12 team going to win one of these big road games? Because we saw UCLA hold serve against Utah.
Right.
We saw Utah hold serve against USC. So now here we go with UCLA and Oregon and Autzen. Obviously, Zach, you know, if no road team wins a big Pac-12 game, that's great for you because you have
I'd be happy. Yeah.
UCLA and Utah, coming into Autzen. But just as a matter of, you know, analysis, do you think a road team is going to win one of these big Pac-12 games, either short term or long term before the season's out?
I certainly wouldn't rule it out. I think at some point the odds are stacked in the favor of someone. I mean, these teams are so good, and a lot of them are so even keeled, and you know, there are a lot of good matchups that I think that there's at some point something's going to break to where one of these road teams really gets a big victory because they're all very, very talented teams. But let's just hope it's not this weekend.
Tony,
I think I agree with Zach in that, you know, the top half of this conference is so competitive with each other on a weekly basis that the odds say there's going to be a road upset somewhere down the line. You know, the Pac-12 historically cannibalizes itself throughout the season, which is why they don't make the playoffs. And I got to be honest with you, I think it's an uphill fight even for an undefeated Pac-12 champion. I don't think it's a lock that they make the playoff this year either.
UCLA is the only team that can be an unbeaten Pac-12 champion anyway.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's fair enough. And I don't think it's a lock, you know, for a Pac-12 champion to do it anyway, to make the playoffs. There's too much that has to happen in front of them. But yeah, I agree with Zach. There'll be something in the next week or two that, you know, is a major road, you know, upset or something notable.
I just want to say before the segment closes that, Tony, great work at Last Word on College Football.
Appreciate
all
that.
the things that you comment on, write about, try to share them whenever I see them on my feed. And hey, Zach, you're my partner in crime at the College Wire Network with Ducks Wire. You, Don, Andy do a great job. And I want to invite all our viewers here at the Voice of College Football to follow Ducks Wire's complete coverage of this UCLA Oregon top 10 showdown. Zach, his team, they're going to be worthy of the moment, worthy of the occasion. They do a great job. You want to follow their work every single day through the weekend, pre-game, during the game, post-game. Ducks Wire, your spot for Oregon UCLA coverage.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that.
I will say that if it does turn out that UCLA becomes the flag bearer for the Pac-12 as an undefeated team, that 32-31 outcome against South Alabama is going to be the most talked about game that was attended by the fewest people in the history of college football.
Right? Yeah. The attendance continues to be an issue. Even with the Utah game, it was still, you know, the team was well underserved by the attendance, which I think got to 50,000, which still isn't capacity. Even with the tarped off end zones, it still was shy of capacity.
Well, they're going to take the tarp off for USC. You know that.
Yes, they will. Yes, they will.
Can I ask Tony a question real quick before we go?
Absolutely.
The attendance is something that has definitely been a topic of conversation for Duck fans. This because UCLA, like you said, has not seen a ton of attendance this year, and Austin is a formidable place to play. Is that something that you think UCLA should be worried about this weekend, playing in such a hostile environment?
I don't think the hostile environment so much as it's loud, unlike most other places that aren't 100,000 people. You know, I think the noise there is deceiving because it's not a particularly large stadium. But the crowd is right on top of you. And so it feels really loud. And clearly, no one at UCLA right now has had a great deal of success in an environment like that. Last year at Utah, they got run over, pretty handily. And Utah is a tough place to play on a Saturday night in November, and I was there, and it was extremely loud. So there isn't a lot of experience with success in that kind of environment. If you're Chip Kelly and you're piping in tons of crowd noise at practice, this week like he is, you're looking at it and saying, look, we've got a veteran team. They've played in big games. They've played in hostile environments. But like I said earlier, but not like this. Not like this game, not with this much at stake, and not in this tough of a place to play. So I think that you look to see what happens early on, false start penalties, or some mental errors in that take the form of penalties in the first 5 minutes of the game. If UCLA can stay away from that early on, then mentally and emotionally they're where they need to be.
Chip is also a person who knows as well as anyone how crazy Autzen Stadium could get, because he was there, during the heyday. So it's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, he helped create the heyday, and he looks at it as, I've been up there already. It's just another game. It's just, because that's just who and what Chip is. He's never going to lead on that there's anything different about anything in any particular game. So I think if UCLA can get through the first 5 minutes without any, even the minor errors, the minor penalties, I think it's a sign that they're dialed in the way they need to be.
Hey, folks, take your cue from Matt and lock in on Tony's work at Last Word on College Football, and also Zachary Neal at Ducks Wire, especially this week, but going on through the rest of the season, because we're talking about contending teams here in the Pac-12. The race should be a whole lot of fun, as we just barely tapped into some of the possibilities and the scenarios that we could face and see for the rest of the season. So, Zachary, thank you so much for joining us. Tony, you as well.
Glad to do it, guys. Have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on.
Right, folks, another edition of Trojans Live here at the Voice of College Football. We did have a super chat come in, so Matt, I wanted to get to that if you've got a minute. And
sure.
While we're getting to that, I was also going to ask you, this being a bye week for USC, is it just strictly with Arizona coming up first and then that stretch drive? Is it strictly a matter of the focus during the bye week? Hey, let's refresh, get healthy, lick our wounds, get some guys back close to 100%? Or are there various aspects of this team, either on the offensive or on the defensive side, that you think will maybe get some attention now that they've got some extra days of practice to shore up?
Yeah, well, it's mostly about getting healthy. And, it's like the Arizona game could be tricky. Like, I can see Jaden DeLora putting a big number on USC's defense if the Trojans aren't sharp, if they aren't prepared. But then right after that, you have Cal and Colorado the first 2 weeks of November. So, like, USC has a chance. Like, if the offense shows up against Arizona, that game can be put to bed early. Like, that would be a great scenario, because then you can rest guys in the second half against Arizona. If the offense can just absolutely put the hammer to a weak Arizona defense, get a 21-point lead. Because then, Cal and Colorado, USC does not, like, those games should be taken care of very comfortably. So, like, I'm thinking, like, there's like a month on ramp. Like, you can just ramp up for the UCLA game very gently if you're USC. The Arizona game being really an exception, because you just can't take things for granted on the road the same way you can at home. And Arizona does have some real upside on offense at a level that Cal and Colorado do not. So it's really about getting guys healthy. I mean, let's remember that the off week comes deep into a season. A lot of other teams get an off week in week 6, week 5. And so it's not as much of a grind in the middle of October, but like, these guys are spent. They've pushed really hard. So yeah, the health is the main thing. Now, if you're going to just ask me as kind of like a side thing, what does USC need to develop? Well, Corey Foreman, clock's ticking, buddy. Like, USC needed someone else on the defensive line and on the defense generally against Utah to kind of be an added piece to the puzzle, to provide something where, Tuli Tuipulotu and Solomon Byrd and Tyrone Taleni, those, like, they've all been making significant contributions. But so you look at Corey Foreman, he's another guy who can add to the mosaic of Alex Grinch's defense, give USC another body, another force, another disruptor, and it just isn't happening. And so in many ways, during this bye week, like, the coaches need to have a heart-to-heart with Corey Foreman and say, hey, we are going to need you against UCLA. We are going to need you against Arizona. We need something from you. We need help on this thin defense. The guys really need to coach him up, Sean Nua, as well as Alex Grinch, and they need to get something from him. Because Eric Gentry got hurt late, and other bodies were dropping against Utah. They needed some more guys to step up. And in terms of a guy to step up, like, Corey Foreman is the first place you look at. Romello Heights out for the year. He got injured and was out for the year early in the season. Need some guys to step up, and that is a prime candidate. Like, if there's there are lots of deficiencies in the USC defense, but if you're saying, who's a guy who needs to add more to this team, it's Corey Foreman. That I think is a very clear answer right now.
Our buddy David Greenshield has a question here, basically citing what a lot of teams that are maybe not quite there yet to challenge the big boys. Would they rather go and play in a Rose Bowl or in a significant bowl game rather than get to the playoff and get clobbered? I think this is where David is headed here, that maybe a lot of USC fans would like to fall a little bit short so they don't get embarrassed in a playoff situation.
Well, I think you try to achieve as much as you can at USC, but here's the real thing. USC is not getting into the playoff. And I know, I think I've seen either Tim or LBC in the comments saying, there's still a chance, there's still an alley. I think we need to really shut that down, because USC is not going to get a bump from a win over Notre Dame. Now, it will get a bump from a win over UCLA, but it will not get a bump from a win over Notre Dame. And so Arizona, Cal, Colorado, you're not getting any sort of bump from those. So there's really only one. I mean, UCLA, and then if USC makes the Pac-12 championship game, all right, a little bit, but USC needed that Notre Dame game to be a high leverage, high value game. If you're really trying to get the attention of voters of that committee, like, you wanted that Thanksgiving game in prime time in the Coliseum to be like that spotlight, all eyes on USC type moment. And on November 19th, you're going to have USC UCLA going up against Utah Oregon. Those two games are going to be the same day. So they're going to split up the national focus on those games. Assuming that Utah is still in the mix, and all four teams in the Pac-12 are still in the mix, the top four going to that day, it's not going to be really a story of USC making its statement, even if it beats UCLA, because you also have that Utah-Oregon result that's going to cut into the national reality. And so that, coupled with USC not getting a Notre Dame boost, and the Pac, if USC is in the Pac-12 championship game, that obviously means it will have beaten UCLA. So that means that every Pac-12 team will have one loss. You're not getting like the real high-end resume under those circumstances. You'll have a couple really good wins, but you don't have a 13-game body of work that's going to survive Ohio State being unbeaten, Clemson being unbeaten, and then very likely that you're going to get two SEC teams with one loss. Georgia beating Tennessee, that means that Georgia would be probably unbeaten, and then you have Alabama in the SEC West, and then Tennessee could finish 11-1 after losing to Georgia. So you just look at the whole thicket, and there's no path through the labyrinth for a one-loss USC, or really any one-loss Pac-12 champion. I'm of the view that UCLA has to run the table. That is the reasonable scenario that gets the Pac-12 into the playoff. Look, Utah has two losses. Utah's done. Utah's not even available for playoff consideration. Oregon lost by 46 to Georgia. Oregon's done. It's really UCLA or USC. And again, with USC not getting a Notre Dame boost, just the avenues just aren't there. And so we can complain about how bad Tommy Rees is at his job in South Bend. for USC not getting a Notre Dame boost.
So, Matt, I generally agree with that, but I'm going to play the other side of it. So, in a similar way to you shutting down, or most likely the committee shutting down Oregon because of an egregious loss in week 1, they could also look at a USC loss to Utah and under standard exclaim the loss based on the officiating, based on 1 point, 2-point play at the end of the game. Rice Eccles, difficult place to play, and especially if Utah runs the table and they finish 10-2, that USC's lone loss is to a quality team, difficult place to play in a controversial game. If they're going to take the deep dive as they should and really look at it, and even if we give 3 spots to the SEC, Big Ten, and ACC, the Big 12 may cannibalize itself, and there may be a difficult decision to make between a USC as a 1-loss and a Clemson as a 1-loss champion.
Yeah, well, USC is a 1-loss. If it's USC with 1 loss and Clemson at 1 loss, yeah. But the problem is the SEC is likely to get 2, and the SEC could even get 3 if Ohio State and Michigan both lose. But like that's really a problem in terms of for USC. The Big Ten champions almost certainly going to be unbeaten. Like the Michigan-Ohio State winner certainly looks like it's going to be unbeaten because we saw Michigan drill Penn State. And if Penn State's the 3rd best team in the Big Ten, which is very possible since Illinois might be the opponent in the Big Ten championship game, like I don't see Ohio State losing to any Big Ten West team. So it's got to, if Ohio State's going to lose, it's going to be either to Penn State or to Michigan. And I'm not seeing it. Like I'm not seeing either Michigan or Penn State with the quarterback play to hang with Ohio State. But let's ride with the hypothetical. Let's say Michigan does upset Ohio State in Columbus, and that would be an upset. Where's Michigan going to lose? Michigan's already taken care of Penn State. Is Michigan going to lose to any of the teams from the Big Ten West? Don't see it happening. And Michigan State's awful. Like, I know Sparty's been a thorn in Harbaugh's side, but this year it's certainly not lining up for the Spartans to beat Michigan. That game's going to be in Ann Arbor. Michigan State's not very good. I mean, beat Wisconsin, but Wisconsin's not very good. Like, so the Big Ten is weak, and also Clemson in the ACC. Clemson's already taken care of the 2 toughest games on its ACC schedule by beating North Carolina State and Wake Forest. The Coastals is an absolute disaster. The odds-on favorite to win the Coastal and play Clemson in the ACC title game, North Carolina.
Yeah.
I think Mac Brown's going to even touch Clemson with a 39.5-foot pole. So just the dynamics of the Big Ten and the ACC certainly point to Ohio State being unbeaten, Clemson being unbeaten. And like if one of Clemson or Ohio State loses, well, if the other one is still unbeaten, that team is still getting in. And then you have 2 teams in the SEC, possibly 3. The windows are just very narrow, and USC needs a lot of dominoes to fall. A lot, not a few, a lot. And it's just really hard to envision at this point.
Matt, how dare you discount Syracuse going to Death Valley this Saturday?
Well, hey, maybe it'll turn out the way it did 5 years ago with Chase Bryce needing to come off the bench, complete a 4th down pass. To beat Syracuse. Syracuse came very close that day 5 years ago, but really,
actually, that was 4 years ago. 5 years they did do it in the Carrier Dome.
Well, they won in the Carrier Dome. Okay, that was 2017. Okay, got the years mixed up.
And then in 18 was Trevor Lawrence's undefeated team. Yep. King Vegeta, yes, UCLA will go 12-0 and get a playoff spot. I would have chuckled. Now I will chuckle at that. I would have done a belly laugh about 5 or 6 weeks ago, but who knows?
UCLA has to go 13-0, 12-0, 12-0 just gets you a ticket to Las Vegas, and we all know how many dreams have died in Las Vegas in the course of human history.
Good stuff. Always enjoy the show with Matt Zemek from Trojans Wire. Get on over to Trojans Wire and check out Matt's work. Is there anything in particular you're highlighting this week, Matt?
Oh, it's just UCLA, Oregon, and you want to follow Tony Siracusa at Last Word in College Football, and you want to follow Zachary Neal at Ducks Wire. I mean, you want to follow Trojans Wire as well, but this is our week off. Like, I want you to support Ducks Wire and Last Word on College Football this week in exchange for Tony and Zach being so generous to come on the Voice of College Football.
And again, Tony Altimore will be hosting a special edition of USC Trojans Live coming up on Thursday at a time to be determined, but we will promote the heck out of that because it's going to be a heck of a show on Thursday night. We'll see you all back here next Monday night at 8 Pacific time for Trojans Live. Have a great night.